Cool, man. Well, let's catch up on a couple of things really quick. Might as well go through kind of the progress of where even JobBoardly is kind of in the process. We might as well just share a little bit of information around that and just where
Yeah,
that's at because I feel like
yeah.
it's a good time to catch up. So last time we chatted, I think we were on the whole kind of mapping out the scope, and then we started in the background just hacking things out. So let's just share. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll just kind of share kind of where things are at so far. So this is where we're
Yeah, this
at.
looks good.
Yeah, so we have find a job, post a job. We have the place holder of Jumpstart right now.
Yep.
Um, Post a job, very simple, straightforward form. We need to add payments in here. Um, I just used 129, so I was looking around at the other job boards. This is what's interesting. I want to talk to you about this. The other job boards, like we work remotely and remote, okay, they charge
Mm-hmm.
between $299 to $550 or something per post,
Dang.
which seems insane to me. But then I started looking around at all these job boards, and it's like it's pretty average actually to be in the $100 range per post.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, when you think about hiring a recruiter, you're gonna pay 20 grand to hire somebody or more or whatever. So, they probably budget $1,000 or $2,000 to throw it on a bunch of job boards, I would guess.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. So
It doesn't seem unreasonable.
yeah. And then, so it's interesting. We chatted about this briefly in Slack, but this is probably one of the most basic applications you can build as a job board, right? Like it's probably somebody's first project could be a job board.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's interesting to me that all these little things kind of add up, everything from like the design choices to, adding payments or just all these little tiny things. And so I'm trying to think of things that were interesting that I found as I was working on this, like in the last couple of days. And, one of those is just like the search form, like this, like very basic search form.
Yep.
And it's like something that's super common to have. And yet, like the logic on it isn't like something that's just like, okay, you just copy paste it in. So it's interesting. I had to go through the process of building this out, and I didn't really do. I'm curious to hear what your take is on this. If you would have approached it a little bit differently, because yeah, I was just kind of like doing it from scratch. I haven't really done this very much before. So let's just go to the jobs index, and I'll just show you in here. We have like a filter by params method that I just created.
Mm-hmm.
We're passing through a hash of job type and location type, and this is then mapping to the actual, column attributes. And then
Yep.
this is going to be an array that comes through because in the job index,
Right, because they're check boxes or whatever.
right? We're just building these jobs index. Actually, where is this guy? Yeah, the checkbox here. We're just using this like kind of
Mm-hmm.
empty array for this, and then just checking to see if they're checked or not, and then passing those params through.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then in that method, in the filter by params method, it's just I wasn't even aware of this method before like the compact, which is just removes any nil, like anything with like a nil
Value. Yeah.
value.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
So I'm curious to know, like you've probably implemented this type of search or stuff before. Like, what would you have done differently, if anything? Like, curious how you would have approached it.
Um. So yeah, I mean, this is like similar to the sorting. Where you have like certain columns that you want to be able to sort by, and then the direction.
Yep.
The 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 tricky thing is the security around this. So, like,
Uh,
for example, if you just look at your filter by params method, if you were to pass in params into this, then it would basically allow anything.
mm,
So, if your controller wasn't securing that down to job type or whatever, then you could, in theory, search, columns that don't even exist in the UI but are in the database, which
mm,
is the semi-dangerous thing. So really, like if you open up the sortable concern, I think it's what it's called. So this is what, like, sort direction's a good example of this. Like, a helper method that basically says, hey, we'll look at the params and see if it's a valid param, and then we'll allow you to use it. Otherwise, we're going to use the default. So if you're playing around with, certain things, or same thing like line 11 class sortable columns. So your model has a list of sortable columns that are allowed, and then we verify it's in that list. And then if you were to sort by, is it published or not, then that is going to filter that out, because we don't want you to be able to sort by unpublished and see, work your way into something like that. So I prefer doing it this way, but it does end up being a little bit trickier, because you got to go through and define kind of it's like strong params where you're like, these are the whitelisted things that are allowed, and so that is kind of the ideal way to do it, I think. Just having a list of approved things. But so I almost always build it the way that you did.
Okay.
And then work my way into, an approval list.
Would we whitelist here? Or would we whitelist in like the controller side?
Yeah, probably. I mean, so there's a couple options that you could just like, say filter by params and throw in all of the params, and then do the filtering inside of the model. But, like the sorting stuff, I do it on the controller level with the sort direction. And so that's like, that you can do kind of in either place. It kind of depends on what you want to do.
Okay.
And actually that param sort there should probably be sort column param sort, I think. Because that's not getting...
Oh, yeah.
That's not going through the validation. So...
Okay. I see. So,
see how easy it is to like miss something there?
Yep.
So that's like the tricky thing is like you can build it super simple, but then to like secure it, you got to lock down the allowed parameters.
Okay.
We may be testing a new job listing type or something that's like not contract or full-time or something, and like you could probably figure that out if you were fiddling.
Yeah.
So
we want to have some sort of a lockdown method that goes into, we probably just want some sort of we could add a concern, but we could also just add a method in, like a private method in the jobs controller to kind of whitelist the params that are going to go through first.
Yeah. And if it's it gets a little tricky of like, so you have a hash of things. So you can filter out and slice the hash to only the allowed keys.
Yep.
But then you also need to probably do that with the values too. So like the job types or whatever that is, we'll only want you to be able to grab apprentice, contract, and full-time. And so you also have to filter out those and make sure that they're included in that array.
Yeah,
whatever.
And I mean,
stuff. Yeah. And again, like stuff like that, like is not as important. The values that are being searched, the like keys and the params are the big important ones. Because if you have hidden fields, like for example, the one I usually bring up is like, imagine you have a user model with an admin Boolean flag. And if you're not being careful, then someone could go turn admin as true, and that's why like you never include it in strong params. But if you're doing queries like this, then you might be able to find out if someone is an admin or not.
Yeah.
And, those things are probably the dangerous pieces of, a security guru will be poking around for those things. So, yeah.
Yeah, so minor thing, but I'll clean that up. It's good to
Yeah,
just
it
chat
is
through
really
this.
minor. You're
It's
right.
good, but it's good to chat through this stuff. I feel like this is beneficial for other people to know too, is that even something as simple as this, right? So we missed one thing in there, like with the sort, right? And then we also missed, or like just talking through how to handle this issue. This is something I've built before in other applications. I'm building it slightly differently this time, and it's just good to like chat with somebody else, bounce the idea, and just be like, okay, yeah, maybe I should do this slightly differently. And it's not a big refactor at all. It doesn't really change too much.
Right. Yep. Yep.
So cool. Yeah. So then I'm going through, and I know that I think the next step, like we mentioned a little bit before in our chat, was just we need to have an area for an account. When somebody creates an account, we're storing a current job ID if they're working without an account, and then we're associating that job to the account if they create one. And then we need an admin area for them to manage their listings if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And then we should probably also have
This
some.
is another
Oh, go ahead.
another thing that comes to mind though. So accounts get complicated fairly quickly because of the multi-tenancy. So when we're talking about JobBoardly as a platform, and this is running on the jobs.gorails.com subdomain, it's going to use the subdomain to pick up the account and set the current account. But there's really and maybe this needs to change in Jumpstart itself for simplicity. But what happens is like your user is going to log in and post a job or whatever. They want to see their jobs, but the account is the GoRails account. So that's what differentiates, the logo and other things, the jobs that are actually listed. But when that person logs in, they're going to want to save their jobs to their account. And it needs to be like a sub account of GoRails or whatever. Right. So this is maybe something that does need to change in Jumpstart, is like maybe we don't assign the current account to that or something. Because when you do multi-tenancy on a domain and subdomain level, it's kind of a different beast than just logging in and having a session set your current account. So we'll have to figure that out as a follow-up step. And that becomes trickier. If we build this for one single site, it's really pretty easy. But then you get into multiple sites and it's more complex. So
And yeah, this is my question too, is is the juice worth the squeeze here? So do we want to build the platform that is all subdomain based, or do we want to build something more like Jumpstart, where we can kind of spin up new ones and they're on a specific domain? Talking with Peter the other time, it made me think about like, would this even work for him? And the answer is probably not, because he needs like that top level domain name.
The real key difference is you can have it run. So the way your server works is like domains are pointing to your IP address, and Nginx is saying, hey, we're going to send all this to Rails. And Rails is like, oh, or Nginx is like, oh, you came in from this domain, we're going to render this app. And if there's not a matching one, it'll just pick an app to render. So we can actually point, Ranchwork or jobs.gorails.com or any domain could point to the JobBoardly app. And really the difference ends up being that when you come from jobboardly.com, we render out the regular homepage in our regular site. But if you come from Ranchwork or jobs.gorails.com, we see that in the database and we say, oh, you're one of our customers. We want to render your site. So the Rails routes just detect that and render the correct views and things for those. So it can all run in one app. But the problem becomes Ranchworks design is going to be totally different. He wants to be able to customize it and, add images and probably make it look significantly different. So we then have to have a site builder or something that, or like, predefined places to add like a background image in the header and that sort of thing. And so if we really want to make it truly customizable, then yeah, it makes more sense to be its independent template, and we spin up a separate app for each customer. But you can make it an actual platform by running one instance of the app and then being able to render different stuff for each. But it gets us into like, do we add themes and do we, all that stuff. And yeah, do we want to go that far?
Yeah. And
that's the question.
I think for our first go at this, maybe we try to just focus on like doing the single one really well, and then saying like understanding that we will probably have to migrate if we need to later to handle some of the other things.
Yeah, it's much easier to build and launch with just one, because you get real deep into the weeds pretty fast on the little questions like, how do we deal with accounts where you're on Go Rails subdomains? That's the current, that's like, and maybe this just is part of what needs to change, is maybe Jumpstart needs a concept of like a, how do we even describe it? Like maybe accounts are nested in a way, like account can belong to another account where, the Go Rails version is the current account for the site or something. We noticed the subdomain or the domain, and we set the site account maybe.
Yeah.
And then there's the current account for the user who happens to be underneath that site account or something. And that has definitely been a point of confusion on Jumpstart, because what does it really mean? Like those are two kind of different concepts, but all of the gems have actually treated it the same, where when you have access tenant or the apartment gem, they look at either, a cookie or the domain or the subdomain, and they're just like, yeah, pick one. So that's how I implemented it, because that's what they were doing. But in reality, building, a multi-tenant app like that probably needs another level of organization in there. So you can have a company like let's say Basecamp wants to post jobs on the Go Rails job board. Then you'll have someone sign up, create an account, and then they'll want to share those job listings with maybe somebody else on their team. And maybe we could honestly we could like ignore that, where you can't share jobs and there's only one recruiter that they share a login at Basecamp, and all the jobs are attached to the user or something, or their personal account. But we could also make the account that you can join and share those job listings with other people. So it is definitely it becomes complicated fast.
Yeah, multi-tenancy is really complicated fast. I mean, anything in that realm, because you just have to think through what are your levels, like to your point, so you have the account level right now, and then you have account users, and then you have your users, and then so I'm trying to think of the best way. We might have to talk offline, because I don't know if there's going to be an easy way to figure this out in the moment.
Right.
I feel like we could definitely get in the weeds in this, but I think the goal should be, how do we fix the problem that's right in front of us, which is, let's get the job board up for Rails. Let's see what we learn there, and then let's talk to some people who might want to create their own job board and figure out then how to implement it from there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we'll just launch it as a single app, but refactoring, or we'll probably end up with two code bases. This one will be the one for Go Rails, and then we'll clone that when we're kind of done with that, and then work on refactoring it. But I do wonder if we'll end up with the situation of like adding teams or accounts later on is a freaking nightmare. So I'm wondering if we're going to end up dealing with that with multi-tenancy,
Yeah, and
where it ends up being
if it is something that we want to do right out the gate, that's totally fine. You know, like where we have a team and then it belongs to, you know, the job belongs to the team through like the user or however we handle that. I think we're doing that with 12 and 12 now anyways. I think we should maybe try to think about some of those things, but not solve all of them. You know what I mean? Right away, like trying to go as far as to do what Peter is doing with ranch work. You know, like maybe if we just start with very basic theming that we're just swapping out like a logo or something based on the current account, you know, in the subdomain and stuff like that. Something like almost like what Substack is offering, you know, right?
Yeah, and Podia comes to mind with like their sort of the idea of like you have a set of widgets that you can drag and drop in a certain order. So like, you know, we could also build a mini site builder where, you know, you can choose to add blocks onto the page, and we just have maybe 1 or 2 pages that they can customize: the index and the job listing. And maybe that like main index page, you can add a header that's got like a background image, and you can customize a few things for that block. But then you have the listings and the filters, and that's maybe its own block, and maybe a call to action block at the bottom, email subscribe block, and kind of, you know, give you 4 or 5 different things, and you can rearrange them as needed. Yeah. You know, we could do something like that. And that wouldn't be too hard, but yeah, it ends up being you know, Peter's using WordPress because he can go change all of the design, you know, and we can't, with the platform, give you that. There's just it's not possible because you can't edit our code. And that wouldn't be secure. So, you know, the easy thing is like, okay, we spin up a separate app where we can change them all individually. And maybe that's a good place to start, where we start to see like, this is what people are asking for, you know, and then you learn what we should actually build for the design custom stuff. But I don't think something like a Podia would be too bad with the site builder of like content sections. So we'll have to get to that when we get to it, but it's certainly you end up building Squarespace or something, you know, and it's like, that's not the intention here.
No, that's not the point.
Long term, maybe, but
yeah. And what I love is just, we'll get to that when we get to that. I think that's what we need to focus on, is like, right now we are the, if you want to use like the gold rush analogy, we are creating like the board that is actually like the revenue generating thing. It's like looking for the gold, right? And then we're also trying to build on top of that, like the picks and axes. It's like the platform that other people could then use. But instead of jumping straight into the platform, I think it'd be really cool for us just to see like, how do we make a job board? How do we make the Rails job board profitable? Like, let's try to grow this thing. Let's try to learn some things from this. Like, experiment with different pricing, experiment with different outreach, and like trying to figure out some of like the growth things we can do to just generate revenue through this job board. Then take those learnings and apply them to the platform, you know, so we can kind of like go from becoming like hunting for gold to building the pickaxes, instead of just jumping straight into the pickaxes and creating the platform.
Right.
And all that stuff.
Because and that's a good way of explaining that, is like, there's multiple levels here. Like, you can sell pickaxes, but then it's a whole different job to actually build pickaxes and then distribute them. You know, like, this is definitely version 1 is selling pickaxes. Version 2 is, you know, manufacturing pickaxes for other people to sell. You know, that they are very, very different. And I don't think people realize that there's like I don't think I've heard that before. You always hear the like selling pickaxes in a gold rush, but like, there's a lot more to that in the real world, you know, and you need to be deliberate about what you choose there.
Yeah. And for us, we're going to learn like like some of the strategies around actually making money from a job board. Hopefully, like we're going to learn some of those things, and then we can apply it to the product and apply it to our marketing to influence other people to try our platform, right? So I think that there's this benefit of us being able to dog food the product and use it ourselves and just be like, no, we're actually making money from this thing. It's legit, like it's great. And maybe, hey, we just stop there, like maybe it just does really well. But I also see like a path towards, okay, like somebody else is interested in doing this. What does that look like? Do we create a platform? Maybe we're an enterprise solution where we just spin up a clone of this. We hack it out, and then it's it's a totally different thing. So
right. I was going to say, not like probably 90% of what I saw in searches for job board software was a platform. And, I had that initial feeling of like, they're all going to look the same, like every instance of whatever forum software looks the same. They might change a background image or whatever colors. But one of them was, I don't remember the name. It was actually a Ruby shop that was like, hey, we built a bunch of job boards. We've got a template that we can use, but we'll customize it to whatever your specific needs are. So in one direction, you could take it as a SaaS, a true SaaS, where it's customizable and you build a lot of tech to allow users to customize it themselves. Or the other option is to build it's like a product like, I don't know, productized service maybe is what like Brian Castle would probably call it, where it's like a, kind of a routine that you can do that we've got a job board template. You give us a design, we'll go implement it. If you've got designers, we can go customize this to look just like that or whatever. And, that could be probably a much higher priced option where you maybe maintain it still and you charge them for that. But like, you pay us 20 grand, we'll build you a custom job board with all your design and whatever you want or whatever the price ends up being. And maybe that's another direction you could take it.
Exactly. And you already have all the building blocks here for us to kind of clone it up really easily and for us to do it as a small team. And so that's super appealing to me. I don't think that model's talked about enough, honestly, is this idea of, okay, before you go to automate and fix everything with tech, find a way to, create like the solution that's going to actually make you more money, maybe try that and see if there's something there. And then you're going to learn so much from that. Like, oh man, we could reuse this. We could maybe then implement this into the platform. Then the platform becomes much more possible because you're understanding the pieces that are redundant, the things that really could be, replicated. You don't always see those things right away,
This is so good because a common trap that, beginner developers fall into is I want to learn all these like design patterns and follow all the rules correctly. And so you hear rules or whatever, like don't repeat yourself, dry. And it's like the idea behind dry is when you see that you are repeating yourself, then you refactor and you do it. You don't do it from the very beginning. And that's exactly right. Like that is probably the path to go for us is like, we'll build one-off job boards. And then once we've done that 20, 30, 40 times, even 10 times might be enough that we're like, oh, this is the common thing everybody keeps asking for. And, now we can go build that into the software and like actually build a platform instead. So that's probably the way to do it. And you can apply that same rule to programming and to building a product same way. And I always thought that was good. Somebody just tweeted about this too. It was like, go basically, if you're building a new business, go treat your customers as clients and go just like help them as much as you can as a, almost as a customer of yours, as a consultant, and then just do whatever you need to help them and learn and do that 10 times, 15 times, whatever it is, till you start to notice those patterns. And then you're like, okay, we can automate this now. Yeah. But if you try and automate from day one, it's just it doesn't work out very well. And that's why so many people build stuff that doesn't get used or ends up clunky and stuff, is because they didn't do that enough. They didn't study the problem enough times.
Yeah. And for us, we're going to actually feel this. So we're going to get to use it. And that's what I'm excited about. Is I'm excited to see if we can generate some good revenue just from the job board itself, and then learn from that. Like learn like how the whole like running a job board is, like, and what it's like to try to grow one and all that stuff. I feel like that is really interesting to me because as boring as it seems, like it can be very like lucrative. It can be something that's like a legitimate business for somebody to build. And then you have the experience to take to say, hey, XYZ who runs community on, I don't know, React or Laravel or any other community, say like, hey, we can build a job board software that will help you earn X amount of revenue. We've seen this with Rails. We basically have a playbook for how you can implement this. And then we have the software that goes along with it. And so to me, that's a much stronger place to be than just like another platform that's just, like somebody just decided to build a platform for it. So I'm super excited about this, just to make our first dollar from the job board itself, and then to start like trying to grow that, like contacting recruiters or contacting people in the space and saying like, look, we're offering like certain deals, like try to like package things or whatever, and then create the ability for other people then to do the same thing.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, one of the things that I noticed on We Work Remotely, which is a sign that they understand the problem, like they've worked with people enough. And this is one of the things that I expect from a previous like Basecamp operation, is at the bottom of the job posting form, there's a section for filtering your applicants, and they will go through and prioritize batches of applicants 3, 14, and 30 days after your job posting, ensuring you see the right people first. So for $200, you can save yourself probably several hours of time. That right there at the bottom, filter your applicants.
Yep.
That is such an awesome thing. And it's what's cool about this is like you can build a fully hands-off product like We Work Remotely, where no human has to be involved, but you can get a human involved for $200. You could pay a virtual assistant to do that filtering 3 times. And maybe you only make $100 or $50 or something on that as profit. But the human aspect of this is so interesting because I love the idea of having software that has, add this person automatically. Just check a box and a real human will show up and do some work for you. That is super cool, super like valuable, because the quality of that is going to be far higher than, posting on anywhere else that doesn't do that. It's all work on your shoulders. And it just shows that they like really care and understand the problem, That is so interesting to me.
Exactly. It's just the ability to be so close to the problem, be so close to the exchange of these two things happening, people looking for jobs and then people trying to get applicants. And then understanding that well enough and being a good enough middleman to understand when there's another opportunity. Oh, like, yeah, you hate doing this part? Cool. We offer a service right on top to do that. Yeah, it costs extra, but look, you don't have to worry about it then. And I feel like what's little talked about in software, because most of us are developers or builders, is like, inserting some manual stuff, inserting some things that aren't easy or automated. And just saying like, no, there's like a real opportunity to serve people here. What's your goal? Is your goal to make a profitable business? Then like you can do it still with things that aren't completely automated. Like you can find ways that to provide a lot of value and charge more money then, and still have a great business. So I'm excited about this space because I do think there are, as boring as it is, I think there's just a lot of opportunity here. Like I think that's what's interesting. There's like, it's boring, which is great to me, honestly. and there's like a big problem that people have in many niches. Like the niches here are endless. Connecting like good workers with people with good jobs, like that's never going away, and there's tons of opportunity there. So if we just insert ourselves into this space, like we'll see other opportunities come up as like the problems or the tech change and stuff like that. Like we'll be around the problem, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Cool, man.
it's still one of those things that like it takes a long time to feel like things are set in stone. Like you know that I just repeat this and that's my business now. That's like where Go Rails is at, where it's like I know what I do every week and I can just operate it and it takes less thought. But right now it's one of those things where the job board is we could totally go a million different directions, and each one of those decisions you make along the way impacts a lot. And it's just going to feel unclear and a bit unstable for a while until we make a bunch more of these decisions and get further in. And that's normal. It's just, I feel like I want to just go build a job board and just have it done, but there's so many decisions, even for something as simple as this, to do we want to offer these upsells? Do we want to do any of that at the beginning? Do we want to, build a platform or not? Like there's definitely technical debt that builds up if we go in one direction or the other and decide to change later on.
Yeah.
And those are things that like are easy to worry about prematurely. Like if we build one instance and then no platform and add a platform later, yeah, it's complicated. And maybe those customers who we built the sites for never migrate over to the platform, and that is something we just have to support forever or whatever. So, lots of questions that will get figured out, I'm sure, but lots of uncertainty is the name of the game.
Yeah. And just one step at a time. I mean, the goal for us when we were chatting about this earlier, maybe last week or something, it's let's get something out there this week. Let's just get something out in the world and just push. And I think that's like a really good point. Basecamp talks about this is don't change your timeline, change your scope, change what you're trying to adjust. And so I think that's like a really good take, is to say, how do we get something out there? How do we test this? And just go from there. Go from like people putting their jobs on our board to wherever we need to go from there. Like lots of possibilities. Let's not worry too much about them. Let's just start with like get some out there, get some people paying us, and then we can move into all this other fancy stuff we want to do. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, man. So I wanted to, the purpose of this call initially was just to chat through the delegated type stuff. So I just want to show you that really quick so that you can kind of do a deeper dive screencast on this.
Yeah.
So I'll show you the kind of the behind the guts of what I've been working on this tiny side project, and just give you a chance to get a chance to look at that. And then, yeah, hopefully it's helpful to other people as well.
Yeah, there's been a lot of excitement about the delegated types, but the name of it doesn't immediately describe clearly what it does or why you use it, Yep. And I think that's the thing that, there's excitement about it, but how and why do we use this will be a good question to have answered.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just start with when and why you would use this. And I'll just use the use case that I have and the one that Basecamp is using, because I feel like this is a really good use case for it. There's many applications you could use. But let me just fire this up and kind of walk through the structure of what Basecamp is doing behind the scenes, Basecamp 3. So Basecamp 3 uses a structure that, if you're not familiar with it, you might have seen like their URL structure and been like, wait, what? What is this all about? And so what they do, let's just jump into this project we have here called Relation Kit. They have projects here where you have your project ID. If you jump into the messages, you'll see this buckets pop up. And so you have buckets and then the bucket ID, and then you have this other object and then that ID. And so what this is doing is the bucket is a polymorphic that is just pointing right now to a project. So that's like the project right here. That's the project ID. And then you have this.
Yeah, because
oh, go ahead.
Because like normally what you would expect here is like if you go back a page, you were on Basecamp, your account ID, and then your project ID.
Yep.
But when you go into the message board, you would think it would be project / messages, but now it's bucket instead. Is that ID the same?
Yep.
Of the project and the bucket? That's interesting.
Yep. So what they do then here is from here on out, when you're in this section, when you're like grouped inside something, you are referring to the bucket, and the bucket, think of the bucket and the recording as a pointer. So these are pointing to the project. These are pointing to like the message element or the message object. And then what you're doing is when you're modifying those top level pointers, you're just creating new records instead of actually updating or editing the instances inside of them. And I'll show you kind of how this works in the code. But this is what's fascinating to me is they take this concept of we're going to make everything immutable. Everything in like the buckets and the recordings are immutable, meaning that they won't be edited directly. We're just going to create new ones every time and then just point to the new ones.
Which is important for like security and, you know, just giving the ability to like, you know, like Facebook had a funny thing of like, you can post something like offensive or something to trigger somebody to write some nasty comment. And then you delete your comment and it appears that they were replying to the original post.
Yeah.
And you know, like you can write something and then edit it, and you need to be able to like see what was the original message and whatever. And so that is, you know, this is like a pattern that needs to be used everywhere because, you know, any GitHub issues or Facebook posts, or this is why Twitter doesn't let you edit still, you know, like the complexity of a social platform where people are writing things and changing it. That is hard to, if you don't keep track of the history, you can't have a good experience. So this is really interesting.
You can use triggers and some of that stuff for those things, right? Like Postgres triggers, or you can use like things to copy and clone or create new activities, like and track things and duplicate all that stuff. The benefit of doing it this way, though, what's cool about it is when you're just using pointers, those top level elements are easy to duplicate, are easy to clone, are easy to change the status of. And then those, you're just pointing then to the objects inside of them. You don't have to like, you know, if you want to duplicate an element and it's got many other things underneath it, you don't have to like duplicate everything underneath it. You're just you're just duplicating that top level pointer. And that's just pointing to those like same records or whatever. So it's a really interesting pattern that Basecamp uses, and I'll kind of walk you through the code here just so you can kind of see how it works.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a hard to wrap your head around thing.
It is. I mean, I'm still trying to get a better sense of how it all like works together, and I'm just scratching the surface of this, which is why I wanted to talk through it with you, because I feel like I'm understanding it better too. So the routing here, kind of straightforward, but really what we have is the ability to edit, like this is a book software, and I'm like a small ebook software that's kind of cloning that same pattern that Basecamp is using. So in this case, we're talking about books and chapters instead of projects and messages, but that's just the way that it is in my app. So you have the resources, the top level resources that you're working with. And then inside of these, let's just go into chapters, for example. And this is where we're going to talk about the immutable stuff. When we create a chapter, we check to see if it's valid. And then we're going to create a new recording on this bucket that belongs to this bucket. And this is the first place that you're going to see the bucket stuff being done, or the recording and the delegated type stuff being done. So you're creating a new recording, and I'll show you this method in just a second. And the same thing is true when you're updating it. You're just creating a new recordable. And so if I go into this bucket, this is that method that does the recording. And what this does is it gives you that benefit of like the parent-child relationship stuff. So this is on, think of this in the bucket. If I go to Postgres, and I'll show you kind of what this looks like. The bucket then has, you have the bucketable type. This is the polymorphic thing that belongs. This is just the pointer again. And then you have recordings, which belongs to the bucket. And this is where your chapters will be created. And then this is a pointer then to an actual chapter model. And the chapter model is very, very slim here. If you see, it's just the title, subtitle, and published at. The status of that chapter and everything else, whether it's archived or deleted, is going to be done on the actual recording itself.
So it's kind of, the recording is kind of like an event or something that happened, like, where people are probably familiar with like a public activity gem, where it's like, you directly create your chapter and then you create an event record that points to the chapter and said it was created or updated or something. This is kind of like, let's create the chapter through the bucket, and then we can do both at the same time. Yeah. Because that's another problem, is like, you want to make sure both of those things happen together.
Yeah, and create the chapter through the recording, and which is the recording is through the bucket. So it's like this, they have a double polymorphic thing going on here, and it seems super complex. But what's interesting is when you peel it back, this is what powers the whole thing, is this delegated type. And this is the method that you'll see in that pull request of delegated types. If you look at the comments and stuff like that, you can kind of dig into this method. But you're defining the delegated type, which is a recordable. And then you could put chapters, you could have discussions, like whatever you want to be a recordable item, like a recordable model. And then those are those tiny models that sit on top of the recording. In the chapter, then you're going to include that recordable relationship, which is a has one recording as recordable. And this is the pointer. So this gives you kind of that single table inheritance kind of feel, where you're just dealing with one record. You're not dealing with like, has many. But this is really what ties all of that together, is the recording. You have a delegated type, and this is where you would establish other recordables. And then those recordables, you'd have to include the concern in.
So if you want to render a book's chapters, do you say like, we look up the book, then the bucket, then the recordings, then the chapters or something?
Yeah. So in the case of the book, you're going to have the book, which is actually a bucket. And then you're going to point to the bucket's recordings that have the chapter type. So if we come into here, we have many chapters through recordings. The source is the recordable. The source type is chapter.
So do you have a book model, or is it just a bucket?
I do. So, and the book model, this is also stolen from Basecamp. So they have a project model too on the top end. So if you come in here, they still have like this projects thing, and you can edit the project in here. Right. So like this is very straightforward. Like you can actually edit this model itself directly. And it's just like these tiny attributes that are on top. And so I have that concept, the same concept in TinyBook, where you have a book and you can edit that top level book. But then when you go to create chapters, you're creating recordings that belong to the bucket. And then from there on out, like when you're in that realm, you're just doing like stuff that's on the recording primarily. Or on the bucket. You're just like creating new recordings.
Okay. I can see that, where it's like you have a book, but here's all the bucket is all the activity that happens in the book.
Right.
Working on that. So are you doing the same thing as they are with the IDs matching, or do you have like a relationship between a bucket and a book?
Yeah, it's the exact same format that they use. So the bucket is really just right now, it's a polymorphic, but all it houses right now is like the book, because that's the only kind of like top level element. Like I probably could have just done, to remove some of this extra stuff, I could have removed the buckets thing, but I was like, well, what if
Sure.
what if you wanted to use something there? Like if you wanted to add a different, top level
Hmm.
category.
Yeah, you
Um,
might have, I don't know what books. Books got chapters, but maybe there's other models that you would have
like a site
interacting
or
with.
something, site,
Yeah,
or,
right.
like there's other things you
Sales
could
page and
tack on. And I was just trying to see, could I clone out what Basecamp has done from their internal structure to like, could I kind of copy it over? Um, and that's what this repo does essentially. And behind the scenes, it's very similar. I'm sure they do some other things under the hood. The other benefit of this, I think, too, to point out, which, we're getting into the weeds here, but what's cool is, let's say on the recording model, you want to be able to do notifications or something like that. You want to be able to like trigger notifications when certain things happen. So
mm-hmm.
instead of doing this on every single model, you have one point of reference to kind of like handle a lot of logic. So a lot of your, concerns can go in the recording or the bucket models, which is kind of nice. You have this one house for handling things as they, as different
Yeah,
models.
yeah,
So that's
right.
yeah.
Because if you're changing a site or a chapter or whatever, this is going to notice that happened, and then when it needs to print out the notification that's specific to that type, then it's like, okay, we'll grab the recordable object there, and then we can say, okay, this was a chapter, so we'll say that John edited chapter whatever,
Yeah.
And that way it's really, yeah, it's interesting because the notifications are a strange one too, where I feel like the bucket and recording naming here is what's really confusing to me.
Mm.
But if you call it like events, then like that can sound like notifications really fast, and they're different. These are like, these feel like they're recording events that happened, um, but it's not. If you use an event, it's too generic or something. But yeah, this is interesting. Naming this stuff is really tough.
Yeah, naming is always one of the hardest things. So I think that there's still some learning here that I need to do to kind of clarify around like what everything is happening and how to best use this. But I've got the base down, and I shared the repo with you guys so you guys can kind of, poke at it and play around with it and
Yeah.
stuff. But what's
Yeah, no,
interesting,
this is neat.
yeah, what's interesting to me is it gives you the benefits, as again, is you have a top level element where you can adjust the status of, you can duplicate, you can have other actions that are tied into it without putting those on every single table and every single class, which is great. You have like a better point that you can do that in. And then you
Right.
get activity tracking as a part of this as well, by having the immutable objects and by just creating new recordings, essentially, or whatever you want to call them, creating new activities. You get that built into it automatically, like this versioning. And I think those two benefits are amazing. Like those feel like more magical some way to me than Turbo links or Turbo, is like, wow, like this is a different paradigm that I'm not used to seeing. And it makes like all these other things that you might want to add on to it super not easy, but like easier to wrap your brain around once you kind of get them moving. Like it's hard to set up. Once you get it set up, it's like, okay, if I want to add this thing to the recording, easy to do. And then I also have activity tracking just built in without having all these other methods and like all this other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, this is pretty, it does feel like a different paradigm. Like I get it talking about it, but to actually go build this myself from scratch, I'd be like, I need to see your code again, you know? Like I need an example because there's a lot going on here. Like I don't really totally understand the, you know, like a delegated type of chapter. Like to me, that seems like it could just be a polymorphic belongs to, you know? Right? Like belongs to recordable polymorphic. And then I'm like, well, what does the delegated type add here that we don't get with that? Because you could totally build this class without delegated types, but I'm trying to wrap my head around like, what is it adding here that's different?
That's a really good question. And I think, the delegated type is adding the ability then to do the has one, where you're having this like a different type of relationship with it. It's always just pointing to one, right? So you're always having that. And maybe you can do this with the belongs to polymorphic. I haven't played around too much with that.
And you can say, you know, let's see, which direction is it? I think it's, belongs to whatever is polymorphic. And then your chapter could be, has one as the polymorphic name. So this is super interesting because originally I was thinking of like, you know, something like we have a model of, and it's maybe a little similar to this, like normalizing addresses out into their own table where you have users with addresses and businesses with addresses and, you know, all these other things that might have addresses. You don't want to duplicate those models all in each one, or the columns all in each of the models. You want to put it in one place. And in a way, it's kind of like that, but yeah.
Yeah. The other example that they share in the actual documentation around this is this concept of like having two different types of very similar models, and then being able to like query all of them at one time and throw them into like the same collection. And so I think that's another great example of like where they're using this to reach through that relationship and grab all the recordings, for example, like everything that matches this type.
It's kind of interesting too, because it seems a little similar to like if you do search, Facebook may be a good example of this. Like Facebook has people, groups, pages, a bunch of different models. And when you search, they need to know, are you searching users? Are you searching groups? And so that's why you end up with like results of, we're going to just give you users because that's what we think you're looking for. There's not the same, because sometimes you want to blend those together, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to have just the best matches and not categorize them and have separate searches for each type. And it seems a little bit similar to that concept where like, you've got entries and they could be of really any model. And we want to be able to like I wonder if this is very, like this came out of the Basecamp has the timeline of activity.
Yeah.
And it's kind of very seemingly like that was where it was inspired by. Like these activity events are happening from messages and campfire and to-dos and all kinds of different things, you know, and we can have an entry that records what happened and whatever the heck record it was. But I still got a little bit to wrap my head around because I know that like you can do that with a polymorphic relationship, and that's what this is. But there's more to it.
I think the other benefit is, so think about if you do like a single table inheritance where you have all these different relationships in the same table, typically, like an activity is a generic activities thing, and you're dumping everything into there. That table can get kind of nasty pretty quick based on the specific requirements of each model that you're putting in there. So it's just this catch-all for all that crap. And I think what's nice about this is it separates all those things out. So it's saying like, on the recording end, like the recording model, what are the most important things that's shared, maybe status, maybe like who created it, this and that. And then those other tables can kind of live on the sides and just add their pieces, add those little things that you need for each thing. And instead of having one ginormous table, try to like manage all that together. And so that one, to get back to the pointer analogy, it's really just then you're building this pointer that points to all these things. You don't necessarily have all that in one ginorm table. And so that's what's really appealing to me too, as you start to tack on other things that you don't even know what you need in the future. It's like, okay, we might want to add comments. We might want to add messages or documents or all these other things, or uploads. Is to add those models in on top of them is literally just adding the type, adding like another type into that method, creating the table, and then including the concern that creates that relationship that has one, and boom, you're done. Like that's it. And that model that you're attaching can be super tiny. Like in the case of using action text, for example, like it could just be an ID table because all that's handled with the polymorphic action text stuff. So like you don't even necessarily need additional columns. It's just this pointer to a new record that's being created, and then it's just saying, okay, this is the one, and another one gets created, and it's like, no, now this is the one. So it's wild to me once you start to like add to it. In the beginning stages, like even for this TinyBook example, probably overkill, probably not necessary at all. I wanted to go through the exercise of figuring out like what is this delegated typing all about? Like what is this? Like why would you even use this?
Right.
And so that's where I looked at Basecamp 3 and I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. Like this is super fascinating, and I hope other people find use cases for it.
Yeah, this is interesting because it seems to define associations automatically for you. Like if you have an entry with messages and comments, you can say entry.messages and it will query that type for you and all kinds of stuff. This is fascinating. It's definitely one where like you can read a lot about it, but not wrap your head around it. And some of the examples they're good, but they're also like, okay, I guess, like I don't like, I understand the polymorphic stuff so well that I'm like, it seems so similar, but also like, what is the benefit? And yet I really love the bucket and recordings example, because that is a super common thing that you'll want to do. And I don't know, that might just become a feature of Jumpstart because that's such a common thing. It makes a lot of sense. So maybe that ends up being something I end up adding in, because I've been experimenting with notifications, and you really want to be able to see an activity log a lot of times. Like notifications are specific things, but there's also a million different types of notifications, and what's the difference between inserting it into the nav bar and the database and emailing it in Slack, and there's a lot of things that are grouped as notifications that are not necessarily. And it is there's a lot of, that's where the complexity really lies in building stuff, because you want a standardized way of doing things, but like everybody does it differently.
And this is just one paradigm. I'm not sure it's like the best, it's not the best for every situation, but it is unique to me to look at and to say, okay, this is a different way of handling things, one that I wasn't used to before. One, which is getting out of STI and having more flexible models that can kind of, essentially just be this pointer. And then the other part of like the immutable concept, which is just one I haven't like really seen much, and I don't know if Basecamp really talks about too much. which is
Oh,
you're creating, these tiny records that are associated, but you're never updating the record directly. You're just like creating new ones and
right.
tracking those things. So man,
Yeah.
I feel like Basecamp, I wish DHH would talk about this a little bit more and like basically explain what I explained, but much better because he knows the ins and outs of it. But I think in just playing around with this, with TinyBook and the code there, I was like, I'm starting to see, oh man, this could be pretty cool. Like I could understand, like I wanted to do this because I wanted versioning on the chapters. And you kind of get the versioning for free in a sense, because every time somebody updates, you're just creating a new record. It's not like you have to manage that, manage versioning. It's just happening.
Yeah. Because a lot of versioning's tough because like a paper trail or something will try and diff the attributes and save only the changes for efficiency.
Yep.
But when you get into like, okay, we have nested records and stuff, and like you change this record and its children, what do you do then? Like it gets real nasty.
Then you have to create a parent activity, and then you got to create a child activity, and then you have to associate the two. And
are databases efficient enough that if you duplicated a record that it stores like one copy of the text? I wonder. Like if you said we updated this chapter and changed the status, but the content was all the same. I wonder if the content gets duplicated in your database or whatever.
I'm not sure how that's handled. I mean, from their perspective, when they are making the update on, let's say, the recording, they're just updating the updated timestamp, maybe the status change of the recording, and then they're generating a new chapter. Like that's what's happening. Like every time you're updating it or creating it. And then when you go then to view that chapter, what you're viewing is like the recording, and the recording is just going to grab the latest one. I don't know like if there's too much diff there, but like you could create some logic to show the diff by just comparing the last two records or whatever, or like comparing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was just wondering if it was efficient in storing the changes or what, because I know that's why a lot of people want the paper trail style.
Right, it's more efficient or something.
But at Basecamp, I don't know if like what size does that matter?
That's the thing. And you're talking about when you strip away a record or like an object or a model that's handling all of the logic and all the attributes, right? Like, so if you have like a polymorphic that handles everything and you're trying to pipe everything through that, versus you have the recording at the top level, and then you have these tiny models on the sides that have very, very few attributes associated to them. Like the cost is not that expensive in the case of a chapter, you're talking about body copy. Like that's not super expensive.
Right.
It's almost more expensive to calculate the difference than to just like, okay, like just create a new one. It's not like all these attributes are being added and need to be calculated against.
Right.
So I don't know. Yeah, it's fascinating. I definitely need to, TinyBook is one of those ones where I just want to like get it out there so that I can kind of like see it a little bit more and play with it and just see kind of how it works. But yeah. I think that a lot of people in the Rails community are curious about it because it's like, that's something. We know Basecamp uses it, or we know it's an interesting thing, but there's not a solid use case for it. And so the bucket and the recording model to me are like a very clear use case. Like, see what Basecamp's able to do with these things to get the activity tracking. And they're able to have like a model that they can handle other concerns and logics with notifications and mailers and whatever else they want to do. They're able to create this pretty cool structure and add on to it very easily. That's kind of the magic, really, is that piece of it. It's not, maybe to your point, maybe it's nothing super fancy, but it's just the paradigm is set so that you could do it.
Yeah, like it's kind of similar to one of my first my first job out of college was working in genomics, and I didn't understand a whole lot of what was going on because it was all Perl, and I had only taken like 1 or 2 biology classes in high school. So going to work in genomics was like, yeah, I don't have any idea what's going on here. But before I left, because they knew I loved Ruby and they kind of didn't love Perl, and Perl was like the inspiration for Ruby. So they were like, hey, do you want to try porting some of this code over to Rails in general? And I was like, huh, okay. And one of the things that the patterns that they used, it seems kind of similar. It was, if you have models with, and I guess this is more, you'll use probably a JSON column for this anymore, but if you have a database model that needs customizable fields, then you could just throw them in a JSON column and store the key and the value for each of those. But they actually created a separate table that had the name, the association to the record, whatever it was, and then it had the name and the value for each of the fields that you would add. And so it was kind of like a way to extend the table with freeform data that way. And it's kind of similar in that sense, but it's a little bit more structured here, I think. But that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
and so my example too, the code here isn't like wired up right now, but I'll have to show it to you when it's a little further along, and just kind of like, so we can just walk through what it looks like in TinyBook and like what's happening in the records in the database. But I do feel like just chatting about this has been revealing to me of like, I know enough about this to be dangerous, but not enough to like really know all the benefits and use cases. I know the benefits of use case for Basecamp, and I can see that one, but I'm sure that I'm missing some of the pieces that they even do under the hood. It'd be fascinating to hear DHH talk about some of the stuff, he used to do on writing software well or whatever. And like, I'd love if he did an episode on this a little bit more and talking about the buckets and recordings, because I know I'm missing some pieces in here, but like, I can't tell you exactly which pieces I'm missing. Like, I just know that I've got like some of the core working, and that's got me excited, but I know I'm missing some of the edges for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause man, their example in the docs shows like rendering the entries and then having it automatically render a different template name depending on if you rendered or if you've got a comment or a message. And it's so weird to me because like I did that for notifications a long time ago, where I had notifications that were polymorphic that point to any model. And then when you render them out, it would say, okay, this was for a comment or a message. And then we go into the messages folder and we'd look at the like status or action that happened. So like user followed a project or commented on a post or whatever. And so we'd have like notification /user /commented and so on. And their example looks very similar to that. So I'm really curious about this because it seems like a very similar solution in a way. But yeah, it's definitely one of those where like to fully wrap my head around it, I have to go build something with it and feel it, Yeah.
And I think that's
just complicated enough.
Just talking about it with you is like, man, I'm curious to see once you go build something, we can chat again and be like, oh, like maybe you can help fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge even. Like, I think that's what's cool about it too, about learning in general, is you get some core pieces, but you don't really understand it until you start working with it more. And then even then, like to explain it to somebody, that's a further level of like understanding. So yeah, I'm curious to see what you think and how you, I know you're going to put together a screencast on this.
I just opened I won't get into this too much, but I just went to the GitHub repo and the code for this, like the delegated type method is like 2 lines of code, but it it defines a polymorphic belongs to.
Oh, what's
So
what you were saying?
It's just adding some niceties to that, it looks like. This
Yeah.
is fascinating. So it's only like 30 lines of code, maybe, as far as I can tell, unless there's maybe other things in here. But it looks like it's just a very lightweight organization on top, which is amazing. So this is really, really interesting. I
Yeah.
think that'll probably be the thing that really helps me wrap my head around it is like, what is it doing? Because the docs are like, you can do all this magic. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But I don't get it still. So
Yeah.
it'll be really good to like have it all super clear. But it looks surprisingly simple, which is awesome.
Yeah. I think the thing that makes it powerful, and this is something that they left out, I think what makes it powerful to me is the way that Basecamp uses it, the way that they do the versioning. And that's the piece that they don't talk about. DHH tweeted about delegated types a while ago. He says, one of my great open source regrets has been not sharing this delegated type pattern sooner. It's probably the most consequential modeling pattern we've adopted at Basecamp in the last 10 years. I will repent, which is pretty funny. But then it's like, so the model itself is cool, whatever. Yeah, that's awesome. Like the delegating typing structure, that's cool. But to me, what he doesn't talk about is the immutable stuff and like creating the records, the recordings, like how it actually works together to make something cool. Like on that tweet thread, people are like, cool, like, what do you mean? Like, okay, how do you use this? But they don't talk about like with Basecamp 3 is doing behind the scenes to utilize it to like kind of the nth degree. And that's the piece that I wish you would talk about more. And that's the piece I feel like is super interesting. And maybe I should just like, build a tiny repo so that people can spin it up and just play around with it, fork off of TinyBook.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think...
Yeah, that's the part that's like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, because I always wondered that. And in his videos, I was like, I really don't get what's going on here. Like, what the hell is a bucket and a recording? And
a recording, yeah.
Like they're abstract things. So it makes it harder to wrap your head around. And generally, they're pretty good at naming stuff. So, this is going to be fun to play with. But I should probably grab some lunch. I'm starving.
Same.
So,
yeah, man. Yeah, hey, great catching up. Let's. I'll just share this out on. It's gonna be a freaking long video, but like, hey, I'll share it out and see if anybody finds it interesting.
I've had several people reach out and say they've been enjoying our videos. So
that's
this
cool.
This is our unofficial podcast almost.
Yeah, I know. I wish that we could just grab the audio and throw it on something, but
probably could.
I'll just share this out, and then I'll share like the portion of like the delegating types with Jason, so he has context. Because I feel like just the code, looking at it, you'll be like, "What?" Like I don't.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
sounds good.
I'll be curious to see what you do with the screencast. Hopefully, you can bring some more clarity to it all.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one because it's so hard to teach it if you don't fully understand it. So
I started recording a video to explain it to you, and then I was like, I just need to like have you on the call so I can like show you, and you can ask me a question, and I can kind of like think through it a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, man, let's do this again. But I'm excited about kind of all this stuff. It's fun to.
Yeah, this is super cool.
Be plugging
and it's
along.
Stuff that's not talked about enough. So these are things that are a lot of fun to talk about. That's why like the action mailbox stuff was appealing to talk about for my RailsConf proposal, because I don't see anyone talking about it, and like it makes inbound emails so easy. So it's things like that are like need to draw more attention to those cool features that people aren't using. And it's usually just because it takes setup, like inbound SendGrid or Postmark or whatever is not really the simplest thing to set up, and it's definitely not easy to test because writing emails manually is in the form thing that they've gotten. The Rails conductor is a pain in the butt. So, but anyways, yeah, cool, sounds good. It's fun.
Let's chat later. But yeah. Good.
Cool.
Yep.
Alrighty.
All right, man. We'll see you.
See ya.